As Dave introduced me earlier, I'm Jim Suerer, CEO at Glacial Lakes Energy. Before I move on, I think he's been far too generous in his accolades that he's placed upon me. I think there's some pretty important folks that I want to acknowledge. Certainly Doug and his group have been, as of the last year or two, have been there right and with us promoting these products and pushing it forward. Single-handedly pushed forward some E30 initiatives in the state legislature last year. Marcy Cole is our Director of Corporate Affairs and Communications. She really, when we began this campaign 4 years ago, she really took it to the next level. Obviously, we're all busy, we all have responsibilities, but she is the promotion of our product and the membership falls under her responsibilities. So a great fit for her. She's been with the company since day one, and so she's had a major part of this. Terry Schmidt standing in the back, he's one of our board members. Obviously, we can't go forward with something like this without the support of the board. So the board has been very, and Terry in particular, has been very supportive and vocal about the higher blends and what it takes to get to that next level. Not always easy. Not always easy. Even within our own industry, there's apprehension. And maybe we could talk about that a little later, but so, you know, we've been called a rebel. We've been called kind of a different animal out there, making, you know, doing what we're doing, but we're perfectly comfortable with those titles, and I think what we've done there, while probably not significant for us individually as a company, because 99.9% of what we make, there's just no people in South Dakota. There's 30,000 people in Watertown, and you know, 900,000 in the whole state. So 99.9% of what we make goes out to the West Coast, to Fort Worth, Dallas, Texas, and even exported. We do a nice job of creating export grade that goes to something like 23 countries. So, so anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about what we've done with our little sphere of influence there in Watertown, South Dakota, or I'll call it Northeast South Dakota, because it really does reach out into some of the smaller communities that surround Watertown. So what is the E30 Challenge? Well, the E30 Challenge is a campaign. You heard a few folks refer to it maybe as just what's going on in Watertown. Well, this is what was going on. It's a campaign to trial the use of Premium E30 in all vehicles, both flex fuel and non-flex, what we call legacy. And we are challenging the conventional wisdom that 2001 and newer non-FFE autos, which are flex fuel vehicle autos, can operate at most on a blend of E15. So the 2001 have been approved to use E15. We think the EPA came up short and should have gone all the way to E30. And you know, for various obvious reasons, much of which were talked about today. The main purpose of our challenge was to drive change, to support rural America. There's no secret about that. That's a lot of what Doug's talking about. But we think we have something to offer. When he says the farms can help the cities or protect the cities, we think we have something to offer in this product. So, you know, when I back in my early years of my career, I left, and I regret that Senator Worth isn't here, but I actually left South Dakota, went to Colorado for 18 years. I lived in that dirty, toxic air for 18 years. And it's interesting, when you flew in, I traveled a lot, when you flew in, you could see it. Once you're in it, you don't even realize you're in it. And so, you know, we think we have something to offer. It's frustrating to be in a setting like that, the Front Range, where you should be able to look up, and there are mornings when you can do that, when the wind's out of the right direction, and maybe on a Sunday morning when people aren't driving, that you could look up and see the mountains, and it's just a beautiful sight. But it's frustrating when you know, you fly in and you look at that and the first thing you see is this ugly brown cloud hugging the ground, and you know that there are solutions out there. So that is what we mean by the statement where we think we have a product that large cities, metropolitan, wherever there's a concentration of people, foreign countries, countries in India, such as India and China, and places where there's large concentrations of people and a lot of activity, we think this is the solution. So the goals of the E30 challenge was to increase the level of awareness, to gather some engine performance data, to dispel the myths about Premium E30, to change consumer preference and behavior. We still, you know, there's just a lot of things out there, a lot of opinions out there, even to this day. And then finally, to create a prototype for government and the industry. Again, if we were looking at this as solely what did we get out of it in Watertown, South Dakota, I would say very little. We sell a tanker or two a week of ethanol locally, and that's pretty much it. Everything else goes on a rail car, it's shipped out of the area. So as we look at the goals, I think that last statement there was really the one that we were trying to drive home. We hope that the industry, that policymakers, that government will take this exercise that we went through and use it as a stepping stone to something else. We also hope that within the Midwest, my vision would be that there are more Watertown, South Dakotas out there, that there are more communities, and the panel up here that said, you know, they'd like to try this in South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska. I think that's a great example of what we're trying to do too. We're trying to entice other communities to do what we've done so that eventually we grow those islands and we cover not just cities and counties, but states. And then, you know, just like E10 did, it started from the outside and worked its way to the coasts. So really, just for folks, I know this is very basic. Some of this is things you've heard before, but E30 is 30% ethanol, 70% gasoline. It's lower in toxins. We've talked about that. In almost every case, it's more affordable. I think there probably are some exceptions where there's an ability to sell that higher octane, that high performance octane, but it's an octane rating of roughly 94, 95. So that is the product, we have, you know, since regular premium is 91 octane, you know, if I look out there, I mean, it would be nice at some point, and I think it's the right way to go, at least initially, to see 15% as your regular gasoline and 30% as your premium. I think it's very likely that folks would move on to the 30 just for the reasons. And then the gentleman from Brazil, they're at 27%, so 27.5%. So we're very, very closely aligned. It's interesting, a couple of days ago I was in Nashville. I talked to a gentleman from Brazil, and and we've heard this throughout the industry. We've not done any official work on it, but there's literally no difference between the vehicles, and I think Steve maybe has done some of this work too, but between the vehicles that are going to Brazil and those that are in the U.S. here, other than I think they can handle some of the higher blends even more than E30 and the whole anhydrous thing too. So to pull this off, we knew that we couldn't just go out, even though that we've got a long history in Watertown, South Dakota, and we've got shareholders there. We've got, and Glacial Lakes Energy is a co-op made up of 4,000 shareholders. Not all are there, but the legacy shareholders are in the area. I would say we probably have about 50 to 60% of those folks are right around within a 50-mile radius. So to pull this off, we needed a couple of things. First of all, we had the history behind us, where some of this initiative has started years ago when the plant was first built. And I think the EPA even sent a representative out to Watertown and started asking shareholders when they were filling up their non-flex vehicles with E30 to stop doing that, or they were going to be arrested. And so, I wasn't there then, but I've heard it from so many people, and Doug's shaking his head that did happen. And then finally, I guess they gave up and left us alone. And so we went through this tough period, as Dave said earlier, and we really focused on saving the company. That was in 2008-9, and it was post-expansion, so we had a lot of other things to focus on. Once we righted the ship, so to speak, we were approached by Steve's brother, Dave Vandergrind, and said, I think Watertown, South Dakota is the perfect place to do this challenge. And this is what I'd like you to do. And so we took that back to the board, and the board was all in, and management was all in. And Marcy, for sure, she was in 150%. She wanted to go with this thing and make it work. So, but when we sat down, we knew that we had some critical pieces that we need, gaps to fill. We knew that we had the membership support. Although that was mainly within our own shareholder group, there's still lots of other industries and residents in Watertown that were skeptical. We knew that we had the network of stations. We have roughly 50% of the stations in Watertown are flex pumps or blender pumps. But beyond that, really the critical partnerships that we needed, we knew that, okay, if we start actually asking people on a grand scale, coming out in the media and asking them to start to try E30, what's going to happen? Who's going to be the first one to be contacted? And we really felt like, well, anybody that is responsible for selling that auto or selling a auto or fixing it, that's the first place they're going to go. So we set out to gather these people together and to find out what they thought. I can tell you we have two significant dealerships in Watertown. One is very supportive of what we're doing. One is maybe not as much. And in his words, he says, I'm not going to get in your way, but just don't expect me to jump in and endorse this, because he had concerns with the brand that he was carrying, that he was going to get crossways with them. The service shops, maybe a little bit easier. The technicians, even within the dealerships. And we held some meetings early on to tell them what we were up to. Lake Area Tech is a technical institute in Watertown, very successful. In fact, 3 years ago named as the #1 technical institute in the country, and President Obama actually came out and gave the commencement address. So we felt it was important to get with those folks and to start working with them more than we had been. The fuel retailers, we knew that if folks pulled up and they were at the counter, we didn't want them to start to, well, you better not try that. So we felt, we absolutely needed to get, get these fuel retailers on board. And then probably what was most enlightening was our own employees. They're working for us. Their paycheck comes every 2 weeks. If we can't get them on board, why would we expect somebody else to jump on board? So we actually surveyed our own employees and found out some pretty interesting things in that process. So that kind of set us back to, okay, now what do we have to do to pull this off and do it right? So from there, and there was many others. I mean, there was some promotional events we did with charities, and some the media was a big part, but and other civic organizations. But slowly we started to push this thing forward, and it was really interesting as to what we were finding out. Early on, we felt it's critical that we have kind of a go-to guy, a point man, if you will, or woman. And I really didn't even know Andy Wicks until this campaign. I'd heard the name, excuse me, dropped a time or two, and you know, so Ori Swayze said, you got to get Andy Wicks on your side. You got to call him. So we reached out to Andy. Andy is the owner of Dyno Tune Speed and Performance in Watertown. It's an interesting shop. It's not your normal mechanic shop. He typically doesn't take just normal run-of-the-mill products or projects. But if you have let's say you decide to buy a Corvette, you want to get a little more, not if 600 horsepower isn't enough, but if you want to get 800 horsepower out of that car, you're going to take it to Andy. And so to get that, he's, you know, fuel is what he works on in performance and efficiency. He specializes in high-performance fuel-injected engines, over 15,000 tested and tuned across the U.S. Since 2006, he tested ethanol in OEM and high-performance applications of a vast array of makes and models, knows this stuff inside out. And has been a trainer for some of the big three and others. And then at one point in time had been selling flex fuel conversion kits for non-standard or non-flex fuel vehicles. And then I believe the EPA came and told him to stop doing that too. So for the longest time, they had their eyes on Watertown, South Dakota in one way or another. But Andy, after I first met him, I thought, you know, this is the guy. There is no question about it. This is the guy, and here he is right here in our backyard. What more could be, what could be better? I guess the other thing I'd add is Andy is very well respected within the automotive circles in not only Watertown or in the area. And it was interesting, the first time I ever went into his shop, nice big shop, clean shop, and I looked around the room and here's all these muscle cars and high performance cars, and there's very few of them that have South Dakota plates on them. They're coming from like a 6 or 7 state area up in the Midwest. So he's got his name out there, and you know, these are folks that like to spend money on cars and probably go through a set of tires in a month. So early on, you know, one of the questions that we kept anticipating, that we kept hearing was, will Premium E30 work in my auto? And I think this is what we put in front of Andy. Of course, some of us knew it would. We've had a lot of shareholders that had these stories. I think Marcy has got a, what's your Honda Accord? What year? 2007. It's got about almost 300,000 miles on, and maybe only a handful of fuel tanks that were E10. It's all E30. So, you know, we had some examples like that, but still, we have a vested interest. Shareholders have a vested interest. Marcy has a vested interest. So, you know, we knew that, okay, this can't just be within GLE. It's got to work its way out into the community and have others experience and believe what we believe. What we found out in the trial is vehicles react somewhat differently, although the data was fairly consistent across all test subjects. And in other words, a Chevy pickup with a 305 in is going to act a little differently, or maybe a lot differently, than a Ford EcoBoost. And now that's a high compression engine, so right away you could see that difference. But even within the same line, different engines that weren't necessarily high compression engines were going to perform differently. Any car with a closed loop fuel control, which is most anything 1988 and newer, is you know, the fuel system would adapt to that higher ethanol concentration. And that's kind of referred to as what Andy calls the adaptive fueling strategy technology. There had been some large-scale testing done in the past, and there was significant parts compatibility research that had been done previously with higher blends as well to dispel any corrosion concerns. So one of the questions that kept coming up, well, does E30 by itself trigger a check engine light? Because that's the diagnostic system that's monitoring everything that goes on in that vehicle, and then it triggers a light. And there's over 2,000 different issues or codes that could come up. E30 was tested, and it produced about an 11% variance. Well, most vehicles are set with about a 25 plus or minus tolerance level, and so early on we knew that E30 was not going to trigger a check engine light. So the check engine light, again, just a little background here: 2,000 codes that can be triggered. Most vehicles 20% variance either way, and then our conclusion was, or at least the advice we're getting from Andy Wicks was, Premium E30 will not be the only thing that triggers that light. There will be something else going on in the background when coupled with E30 that's going to trigger that light. Again, very important, because to this day we still have people that say, well, I put the E30 in and guess what happened? The check engine light came on. I put in regular fuel, guess what happened? It went off. So that's some of what we anticipated could happen. But here's what's really going on in that situation. So you've got your original tolerance or trigger of 11%, which is far below the check engine threshold. If you happen to have a dirty mass airflow sensor, and Andy has estimated that could be as high as 18%, and then you go and put the E30 on top of that, guess what? You're at 29%. Now you're over the 25% tolerance. So that would explain, you take the E30 out, now folks think everything's okay. You put it back in, here comes a check engine light. So those are some of the things, and we still have these that come up, and in every case, Andy has hooked that vehicle up to, we invite them to bring those vehicles forward, we send them over to Andy, he hooks it up to the computer, and he can see there's something else going on in that vehicle. So as part of the test, or part of the challenge, we went out to our the public, and we said, you know what, if you try this, we will buy you 3 tanks of each E10 and 3 tanks of E30. There's a few things that we would ask you to do for us. One is to, that E30 test vehicle sticker, we wanted to get that out into the community. These folks are driving around the community, we wanted them to see that that is an E30 test vehicle. So it wasn't just something they were hearing on the radio or reading in the paper. They were, seeing it in the traffic too. We had data loggers on there, and these were the same data loggers used by the EPA. And we had a number, we wanted a random collection of makes and models. And so here's the list of some of those vehicles. And as you might not be surprised, lots of Fords, Chevys, and Chrysler products up in that part of the country. But really, if you pick your way through there, you've got a Mercedes in there, you got a Nissan, you got a Volkswagen, lots of Toyotas. So we did get, not every make and model, but we got a good collection of makes and models. So in the end, the results, over 80,000 test miles were driven with E30 and the test vehicles. We didn't see any reduction in performance. Some actually felt an increase in performance, particularly and Andy tested this, the high compression engines. Stable or improved fuel economy, again, primarily in those high compression engines. And horsepower increase, that was proved out on Andy's dyno tune. We estimate that there's thousands in fuel savings alone. No check engine lights from E30, and certainly, although this probably isn't as much of an issue in Watertown, South Dakota, we get a lot of wind there. We've got wind towers that surround us, and so we don't typically see the issues that Denver would, but we know that the air quality is improved. So who else is using E30? Just run through. This trolley that runs around town in the summertime is on E30. You got the police department, the ambulances in Watertown are on E30. Now there's a testament. If the police and the ambulances can use it, it's safe. Over in Aberdeen, which is another sister community about 100 miles to the northwest of us, the Brown County Sheriff is on it, the county fleet, Boys and Girls Club, and numerous private businesses. And there's the Watertown Area Transit, just a picture of the buses, some statistics, 268,000 miles that they put on. All but one vehicle slightly increased mileage. Police department, street department, saving money. There's a statement from one of the captains. The Aberdeen Boys and Girls Club again, and I think Mike Herman over there, big supporter. Once we had him believing, he made the statement, no problems in the winter. So to date, since May of 2016, we've been tracking the fuel sales in Watertown, South Dakota, almost 6 million gallons. If you use a 20 mile per gallon average, that's 120 million miles on E30. Thank you very much, and we'll take some questions.